Our remarks will unfold in really three parts. First, I'll talk about what Upward Bound is meant to be personally. Second, I'll talk about what it's meant to be professionally. And finally, I'll talk about the importance of service and giving back. But before I get to talking about what Upward Bound means to me personally, I have to tell you a short story about the intersection of poverty and race. President Johnson once said, "Poverty should not be a bar to learning, and learning should offer an escape from poverty." And I'm here to tell you today that I know quite a bit about poverty. You see, we were really poor growing up. We often had issues with having food on the table. And when you hear people talk about adding water to the ketchup and shaking it up, more ketchup, more ketchup, that was our household. You know? As Chris Rock used to say, you know, when we got sick, we put some water in the bottle, and you touch the bottle, shake it up, go tussin, go tussin. So I'm very well acquainted with what it feels like to be poor and wonder where your next meal is going to come from, and wonder where, the light bill is going to get paid that month, the rent is going to be paid, or if you have bus fare to get to and from where you need to get to. That was my reality. And then you add on to that reality that I come from a biracial family. My father is African American, and my mother's Caucasian. And growing up in the early 80s, let me tell you, being biracial and looking like me was not very easy to do. There weren't very many of us that looked like this out there. And my family really suffered under a lot of societal pressures. We were poor, didn't have a lot of money. I can still remember being with my father in grocery stores and having people look at him and look at us and wonder, those are not his kids. You know, I laugh about it now, but it brought very real pain to him. And he tried to laugh it off, you know. Well, he looks like me, he's just, you know, 3 or 4 shades lighter, you know. So, but there was a lot of stress, you know, with being poor and not having money. You know, and my parents didn't stay together for very long. You know, my father, you know, gradually buckled under a lot of those pressures and issues and turned to alcohol. And which sent our family in a more violent direction. You know, there was abuse in the home, and you know, and when I was 6, my mother left. And it really, you know, it was one of those things that, you know, my father is, in a lot of ways, one of the nicest guys you ever meet when he's sober, but can never stay sober, even until this day. Acceptance was one of the things that I really craved as a child growing up. And in school it was very difficult. You know, the kids who were white, you know, they hear the Oreo cookie terms applied, and some that were even less flattering. So it was tough to find acceptance there. And then it was also tough to find acceptance amongst my African American classmates as well, because though I was one of them, I didn't look like one of them. And you know, when you grew up in a very poor area, there seems to be only, you know, most times there's a single version of being black. And I didn't fit that mold, and it was very tough. And I got to tell you, moreover, that it was more difficult dealing with the lack of acceptance from the African American classmates than it was my white classmates, because you know, my mother was white. My mother tried to work hard. She worked multiple jobs, you know, tried to enroll in classes, things like that. So I had a positive role model in my household who was white, so I could deal with that better. But it was the pain that I felt from not being taken in by my black classmates that was really, that really stung. And I think in retrospect, thinking about this, I think the reason why it was so painful was because my father's African American. These were my father's people that I wanted to be my people, that I wanted to be embraced by. And so not having my father around, and as I said before, there are a lot of us who grew up without fathers. It was especially painful to not be more fully embraced. And you know, this is where Upward Bound really found me. As a student that had that gifted but troubled tag, I was in fights all the time in grade school. Upward Bound found me. You know, Miss Stone, you know, took me under her wing when I was just 12 years old and helped nurture me through my junior high years. And then I started in Upward Bound as a freshman in high school. Upward Bound for me was really the tipping point in my life. Upward Bound did several things for me personally. Helped instill a sense of racial pride, first and foremost. You see, again, there weren't a lot of positive black role models when I was growing up, and the media wasn't very kind to African American males either in the 1980s. And so, starting Upward Bound and reading the works of James Weldon Johnson, you know, and Langston Hughes, you know, and these were very bright, articulate people, African American people, black people, like me. you know, and I felt for the first time that despite, you know, 400 years of, you know, of atrocities and, you know, the Jim Crow era and then the struggles of the civil rights movements, that despite all of that, that I still descended from a race of people that was magnificent beyond all comparison. And that these esteemed, brilliant young minds and older minds, you know, that I come from that. I came from that. You know, so you know, that was huge for me. And which, again, once you start to feel a sense of racial pride, it starts to improve your self-esteem. And that was important for me as well, because again, you know, I didn't have a really great self-esteem at that point. So again, it was really a tipping point. And then the other sort of facet that Upward Bound really impacted on for me personally was it taught me, you know, there's a lot of writing out there now, you know, Cornel West, Michael Eric Dyson, you know, there's some more contemporary authors like TRiO that talk about how we're living in an era of, you know, the post-black era now, you know, and really it's an idea that one can be rooted in your race and not be restricted by it, that there's more than one single version of blackness, you know, and Upward Bound has been, you know, has been teaching that lesson to many young people for a long, long time. Which leads me to the impact that Upward Bound had on me professionally. You know, it taught me the importance of several things. Number one, preparation. You know, Upward Bound was the first time that I ever had to sit in a dorm room for 3 consecutive hours and do homework. And let me tell you, there were many nights when I felt like it was a prison sentence. And so I learned that when I walked into the classroom the next day that I was prepared. You know, and I learned that most success is already determined before you even walk into the classroom. You know, so it's about preparation. And that same lesson has translated quite nicely in the professional world as well. You know, I don't walk into a meeting with a client without having done my homework first. You know, I don't give a presentation without having done my homework first. And I have the confidence that when I walk in there, that though I might get some tough questions and maybe I won't have the answer for everything, I'll know that when I walked in there that I did everything that I could to make sure that I had the mathematical probabilities aligned for my success. Secondly, restraint. And you know, this doesn't get enough attention, but you know, when you're poor and when you're a minority, you know, people draw conclusions about you, and before you even speak or talk or sometimes even walk, they think they know everything about you. And I learned in Upward Bound, I told you I got in fights a lot in grade school, right? Well, I was one of those kids who was very easy to push my buttons. Say the wrong thing, it was fisticuffs, you know. And I learned that all I was really doing was just making other people write about me. You know, every time I responded with fisticuffs instead of like a sharp tongue, someone else was going to be right about me. And that even translates today. You know, there are many times, and I'm sure every single person in this room has experienced this at least once, where you've been in a room and someone says something that you didn't like, that you wanted to just zing them, but you restrained yourself, didn't you? We like to hope you did. You restrained yourself, you know, because restraint is a key to maturity, both personal as well as professional. And, you know, Upward Bound really helped instill this idea of restraint, you know, not rising to the bait when people want to make comments about you that are very disparaging. Third, talent. I worked hard, but I wasn't the smartest kid in class. And I can tell you today that there were a fair number of kids in Upward Bound that were far more talented than I was. But not all of them made it. And I'm sure each and every one of you knows a student who could have made it, a student who should have made it, a student who didn't make it. And there were a few, and programs, even successful programs, lose a few. Whether it was to teenage pregnancy, you know, whether it was to drug addiction, whether it was to death. You know, those are the realities, you know, that we live with. So I learned it was important that talent does not take you all the way home. Talent is only 10% of it. You know, you have to work hard. When I give talks about this, I always tell the students that nothing is owed to you. Nothing is owed to you. What you've been given is an opportunity. You know, you have to take hold of that with both hands and never let it go. That's what you have to do. Because too often, you know, there's this sort of, you know, perception out there that these programs, that these students they act like they're entitled and that it's owed to them. What is our job, you know, to make sure that they understand that, again, you are entitled to nothing here, okay? So take advantage of this opportunity that you've been given. And last but not least, under this professional category is home. You know, I was on the plane down here, I was trying to count how many times I moved growing up. Because, you know, most poor families move around a lot. I lost count at 10. There was never a place that felt like home to me. Never an apartment, never a room that ever felt like home. Until I was in Upward Bound. It's the first time I ever felt like I was home. And, you know, and as an adult, when I go to different places, whether it's these kinds of conferences or if I'm in, you know, professional work groups and I meet a person who's a TRiO program alum, I feel like I'm home. You know, there's a shared experience of, you know, home. Let me tell you, there are a lot of people out there that are program alums. There's a lot of us out there. And so again, it's hard to go someplace and not see or meet or know a person who's a TRiO alum. Which leads me into service and giving back. You know, there are very few things in life that are really transformative. Your faith can be transformative, education certainly can be, but so is service. And it's one of the things I believe in strongly. As Ms. Curry mentioned, you know, I was a tutor counselor in Upward Bound when I was an undergraduate, and when I finished, I taught for 3 summers. You know, I'm going back on multiple occasions to speak to the Upward Bound student bodies. You know, I'm also involved with the African Bar Association's Pro Bono Committee, you know, where we do a lot of free legal work. Too much free legal work sometimes, so get that on my checkbook. Volunteer with the food bank in Akron, as well as I even put my pharmacist hat on and go out in the free clinic and volunteer a few days a month. Ms. Curry mentioned before that, you know, that I was going to run for office, and I've run once and lost in the Democratic primary in March. But you know, President Lincoln lost the first 6 times he ran, so I figure I could lose 5 more times before I start to sweat. But I ran for office, you know, for one fundamental reason. It was service. You know, wanting to give back. When you don't have a lot, you can go, in my experience, one of 2 ways. You can become a person who measures success by the number of zeros in your bank account, or you can realize that everything in this life falls into 2 categories, the eternal and the temporal. Temporal being things that are governed by time. The clothes you wear, the car you drive, the house you live in, none of these things is going to last forever. You know, it's the eternal things that last. It's the people that you serve, your relationships with people. Those things are the things that last forever. And so that's what I'm devoted to, is things that fall into the eternal category. Barack Obama's slogan in his campaign was forward. You know, always forward, always forward, always forward. And I couldn't agree with him more. But to add to that, I would say that in order to move forward, you have to have a good foundation and know where you come from. Understanding who you are, where you come from. And again, it doesn't mean that you're restricted by where you come from. It just means that you're rooted in it. And that it does inform to a certain degree, you know, your worldview. It leads me to one of my favorite writers, and that's James Baldwin, who once said, "Know from whence you came. If you know from whence you came, there's no limit to where you can go." So those are my words to you. Always talk with your students about where they come from. You know, stress, it's important to know where you come from. Know from whence you came, because there's no limits on where you can go. So, in closing, let me just simply say that I'm thankful to be here. I just want to thank Ms. Curry, Ms. Stone, Mr. Vesselo for being such positive influences in my life. And I look forward to hopefully speaking with you again at some point in the future, and maybe getting out on a ballot in a neighborhood near you.